You'll need a Canon EF mount lens. In this example, I'm using a 50mm lens, which I'd recommend because it's really lightweight. You'll also need an M5 stack Atom Light. I think there are 2 versions by now. Any of the 2 should be fine. An SSD 1306 OLED display. It comes with these pin headers, which you'll need to remove and exchange for angled ones. These are the angled pin headers you'll need. You'll also need 4 wires and some heat shrink to connect the controller with the display. And then of course the printed parts for the base box, the display box with the lens mount. Note that the lens mount is a special part that is printed in 2 stages, so please read the instructions. The side plates and the swivel arms and the display plate, which will allow you to rotate and move the display. Don't forget that tiny part, it's the button. Some super glue to get all these things glued together. Let's start with the base box. On one side there's a little hole where the wires will go through. We'll take the side plate for that side, which also has a hole, but first let's check if it fits together. That's the right one. Let's glue it there. Don't use too much glue, it will leave this ugly residue. You really don't need much for it to hold really well. Press it together for a while until it doesn't move at all. Here I cheated and cut this part out from the video. Now these are the parts for the display box. We'll glue the arm with the wire hole to the corresponding side of that box. Press it together firmly, and then in the next step we'll look at how we can get the wires through. So this is the joint. You'll see that there are some like bridges from 3D printing. They're supposed to be there. We need them for printing, but now you can cut them out to make it a really nice and round hole. And then you'll get the first wire and try to push it through. I know it's not super easy sometimes. You can get yourself some stiff wire or so, or some little hook to pull it out if needed. Here, that seemed to work really well for the yellow and even for the blue wire. Red 1, 2. Yeah. Now it goes through the swivel arm. You can try to push them all 4 together. Sometimes it works. And then here I'm using this little wire to pull them out. There we go. That's what it should look like. Let's check if it's moving nicely. Looks good. Now at this point you should solder your pin headers on either side of the wires. For the controller side we'll use the angled pin headers with the long ends going into the controller. And on the other side we'll use some female headers that are straight. Those will connect to the OLED display, and the angled headers will be soldered to the OLED display. So you might need to remove the ones that it came with and exchange them for the angled ones. Okay, now let's glue the lens mount to the display box. It should snap in nicely. You can try it first, but the issue is it will still kind of turn, and we don't want that. So you should put some glue on there to stop it from turning. Don't put much. snap it in and press it for a while. And then we can glue the other arm to the display swivel box. Let's see if that fits. The side plate to the base box. Yeah, that should work. Okay. So some glue again. There are these little alignment holes that make sure you don't like accidentally move the part while gluing it. You can put the glue in there as well. And then on the other side we have that plate which has a slot for the little thread that's on the swivel box. So in the end that will allow you to fix the angle of your lens. Some glue on here. Push it there and also snap the joint. Click and check if it's moving or if it's stuck somewhere. Should be moving nicely. And once you glued it, you can put that little knob on there on the thread, and that should allow you to fix the angle. Cool, okay. Now we need the cover lids for the display box. There's two. One has this little notch for your fingernail. We want the other one right now. So let's get the cables out of the way. Put the first one in. No glue needed. This is supposed to be moved in. And then the one with the little notch. So it should snap in at the end. I won't do it now. But yeah, you can try that out. And before we put the other one in, we'll assemble the little display plate. That is made from these two parts that should snap together. I think they should also hold nicely without any glue. But let's put some glue on just to be sure. Just a tiny bit here and there. Sometimes it's hard to snap these together because they're really tight. If that's the case, just use a little bit of sandpaper. You have a little gap, and that should be exactly the gap, the size or the width of these lids, so that it is rather tight when you move it onto the lid. So it should have some resistance there, so that your display stays in place when you adjust it. Now we snap the other lid in, and then you can try to move and turn the display plate around. Okay, that was just for testing. Let's get it back out, because now what we'll need to do is we'll glue the display onto the display plate. There's a few things you need to make sure. It's got to be exactly parallel to the display plate. Use some hot glue to fill the gaps between the plate and the display, and that will allow you to adjust it and make it really parallel and not like this or like that, because otherwise you'll have a hard time focusing it on the wall or ceiling. And remember, we don't want the PCB to be parallel, but we want the display to be parallel. They might not be aligned correctly. So take a look at the display from the side while the glue is still hot. Also make sure it's centered on the plate. So the center of the display should be at the center of the plate. Remove the protective film and connect the cables. So now we can mount it back into the display box. Okay, there's too much cable here. You need some cable left in the box because you will want to turn it around and also move it from side to side. So make sure you can still do that. And if you can, then we're ready to close the lid. and snap it in. Click. On the other side, it will look like that. You can move it left to right, and you can turn it. So that will really help you adjust the projection on a wall or ceiling. All right, now we'll want to get the lens on there. So let's check if the lens nicely connects to the lens mount. You'll notice there's this little dot. I know it's barely visible, but it should align with the red dot on your lens. And then you turn it. If it's like not super easy in the beginning, you might need to turn it a few times to smoothen it out a bit. If it's really bad, try to use some sandpaper. And then you can screw it in. You don't want to go all the way, but maybe like half, and then later on adjust it when you're actually turning it on. Okay, swiveling works well. All right. Now, on the other side, we'll want to insert the controller, but before you do, don't forget the button. It needs to go in first. Push it in firmly so that it aligns. And then the controller. You'll want the USB port facing to the back, and then push the controller in from the side, bending the snap fit but not snapping it yet, and then pushing the controller down into place until it snaps. Then connect the 4 wires. They should be ground, VCC, and then clock and data signal line. For the gray version of the Atom light, it should be port 25 for the clock and 21 for the data. Make sure this is the same on your display. And that's about it. There's the USB port, and you'll have a little button. And if you have flashed the correct firmware, it should just work when you connect the power. Nice.